We're starting with the breaking news we ended last hour with. A New York appeals court has thrown out a massive civil fraud penalty against President Trump, a total that exceeded $500 million. They're calling that penalty excessive. Joining us now, NBC News legal Avalos and NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach. Danny, break down this ruling for us.
Well, it's a lengthy ruling, and all the judges disagreed on their analysis, but they agreed on one final decision, which was that this judgment against Trump was a fine within the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment and excessive fines. And in addition, it was punitive and it was excessive. That's really the conclusion. They concluded that because this was a punitive measure because there weren't any victims who were compensated. It was just a judgment against the company and against Trump. So the court here concluded with a lot of disagreement among them, but did conclude that this was an excessive fine within the meaning of the Constitution's Eighth Amendment.
Danny, when you say that this was a lengthy ruling, we're talking to the tune of more than 300.
In a very decisive moment, a D.C. appeals court not only dismissed Trump's latest appeal, but really took it to task. They pointed out that there's no real chance of success for the appeal, especially when you have the Supreme Court's strong precedent backing them up. This wasn't a close call. Rather, it was the judiciary essentially telling Trump that his legal arguments were so flimsy they weren't even worth considering. The court's decision requires Trump to stick to previous orders, and there's really no way for him to wiggle out of it. Let's dive back into this story, and it's pretty packed with twists. So, remember, Donald Trump got into hot water for inflating his wealth. He seriously exaggerated the value of his penthouse when talking to financial lenders, like he tripled its size in documents. That's just not how things work. He ended up facing a hefty fine of $300 million, which has now ballooned to $500 million thanks to interest. And that all happened about 11 months ago. It's a big deal for Trump, and it also affects his sons because it extends to them too. The whole family is feeling the weight of this situation. Now, there's something interesting that Danny pointed out regarding opinions on the penalties involved in this case. An appeals court mentioned that penalties should serve as a deterrent and express concerns about potential reoffending. They suggested that the penalties might not be the best route to take this time.
But Gary, give us a refresher of this case. Viewers are seeing on the screen from the time of the trial. How did we get here?
So you'll remember that Donald Trump was accused of kind of plussing up how much money he actually was worth and how much money the things he owned were actually worth. He tripled the size of his penthouse in documents to some of these financial lenders and brokers. You just can't do that. Yeah. And he was given a $300 million fine that has been plussed to $500 million because of interest. And that was 11 months ago now. And so this is a very significant win for Donald Trump. And it's also for his sons, because it was paused for his sons as well. So the entire Trump family is impacted by this. But I do want to get to a point that Danny was talking about, how everyone sort of had different opinions when they released this opinion. The appeals court said, one of them said, you know, penalties are supposed to stop people from doing things. They're concerned these individuals will reoffend, and it's getting rid of the penalty. Perhaps not the best idea here.
And for viewers, I think it's important for us to remind them there were certain lawsuits that were against the Trump organization. This is one of the suits that falls in that category. And interestingly, Danny, it was brought by the Attorney General of New York, Tish James. And right now, you've sort of got this subplot happening where the Trump Department of Justice now has subpoenaed Tish James for basically the records related to this lawsuit. One of the promises that they made on the campaign trail was, okay, investigate the investigators. This is certainly an example of that. Abby Lowell, Tish James's attorney, said that this is blatant political retribution. But talk about that bookend here that is new now that the administration is Trump's again.
What's really shaking things up is that this isn't just a one-off incident. Nope, it's part of a larger pattern of legal trouble for Trump. The courts in D.C. have been consistently shutting down his appeals, dismissing his attempts to block court orders, and tossing out what many judges label as meritless lawsuits. it's definitely left the legal team scrambling. It's honestly hard to believe what's happening in the courts right now. Legal analysts are calling this situation unprecedented, as Trump's strategies are getting shot down almost immediately after he files them. The judiciary isn't just pushing back, they're really making it clear that his days of trying to bully, delay, and manipulate the legal system are done. The appeals court used some pretty devastating language that deserves a good look. When a court tells you that there's no chance of success and even cites Supreme Court precedent, they're not leaving any room for interpretation. They're basically saying your arguments are a lost cause and that you're just wasting everyone's time. That is the kind of judicial smackdown lawyers dread, underscoring that he's lost not just this round but the entire battle. For Trump, whose whole strategy revolves around stalling with delays and appeals, this is a complete breakdown of his legal approach. The D.C. Appeals Court's decision to not reinstate an order finding probable cause to hold his officials in criminal contempt sends shockwaves through his administration. This means the original judge's orders are still in full effect, and his officials continue to be at risk of contempt charges. Trump's attempts to shield them through appeals have utterly failed. The court isn't just rejecting his arguments, they're also cranking up the pressure on his administration, keeping the looming threat of criminal contempt alive and well, making it crystal clear that compliance with court orders is not up for negotiation. But here's what's really got Trump in a panic. It's not just about this single case or appeal. The D.C. courts have recently turned down his efforts to block the return of fired officials, tossed aside his baseless defamation lawsuit, and blocked his attempts to fire independent commissioners. Every pathway he's tried to use to stretch his power through the courts has been flat out closed. The judiciary is drawing a bright red line, telling Trump that being president doesn't put him above the law, doesn't grant him limitless power, and most definitely doesn't mean that courts will just rubber stamp whatever he wants. The timing of these defeats couldn't be worse for Trump. Just when he's trying to assert his authority in his new term, the courts are systematically stripping away his ability to rely on legal intimidation and delay tactics. The D.C. judiciary is making it abundantly clear they're not backing down. They're sending a strong message that they won't stand by while anyone tries to game the legal system. This shows a significant shift in power, especially with the judicial branch stepping up as a serious check on Trump's tendency toward authoritarianism. Let's dive into some of the tough breaks Trump has faced and why these losses are pretty devastating for him. Take the appeals court decision from November 14th, 2025. It wasn't just a simple rejection, it was a complete knockdown of Trump's legal arguments. The court basically stated that the government had zero chance of succeeding on appeal, which is the legal way of saying, your case is so weak we're embarrassed you even brought it up. Typically, you only hear language like that in response to the most ridiculous legal claims, so seeing it aimed at a sitting president is downright astonishing. Now, let's not forget about the contempt issue, which really stands out. It indicates that Trump can't shield his team from facing legal repercussions. When the appeals court decided not to reinstate the order, it meant that Trump's officials are still at risk of criminal contempt charges if they ignore court rulings. This puts Trump in a tight position since his aides must choose between following his possibly illegal orders or risking jail time. When your own people realize you can't protect them from prison, your hold over them starts to slip away. This pattern of setbacks isn't limited to just one instance. When Trump's infamous defamation lawsuit over the big lie was tossed out, the appeals court didn't just dismiss it, they labeled it meritless. That's legal lingo for this case is total trash, and you should be ashamed for even thinking about it. It's pretty humiliating for a sitting president to have his lawsuits thrown out in this manner, as it seriously chips away at any claims of legal standing he might have. It's becoming clear that Trump is using the courts as tools for harassment and political posturing, and the judges just aren't having it. And here's another major hiccup for him. The Democracy docket reported that Trump's effort to fire an FTC commissioner was also shot down by the appeals court. This is a big deal since it shows he can't simply dismiss independent officials who choose not to follow his orders. The court is standing firm in protecting their independence. The way the courts are handling Trump's legal tactics is honestly something to note. Judges are getting straight to the point, rejecting his appeals and motions almost as soon as they hit the desks. It seems like they've had enough of the games he's been trying to play. This shows a pretty clear urgency from the judiciary, recognizing that any slowdowns would just give Trump room to push his agenda and undermine the rule of law. What's interesting is that these decisions are rooted in solid legal reasoning based on established precedent. They're not inventing new laws or stretching definitions to make a case against him. Instead, they're applying straightforward legal principles that are well known and respected. When a court leans on directly relevant Supreme Court decisions, it's like they're saying, this isn't even debatable. The law is right here and Trump's got it all wrong. Because of this clarity, it's tough for him to argue he's been treated unfairly or that there's bias in the courts. The ripple effect of these losses is pretty damaging to his overall legal strategy. With each defeat, it gets easier for courts to cite previous rulings against him, creating a growing stack of decisions that consistently shoot down his arguments. His lawyers are finding it trickier to come up with fresh ideas or approaches that haven't already been dismissed. And let's not forget that when courts are moving so fast to shut down tactics, it's hard to stall for time. The fallout from these judicial setbacks doesn't just stay in the courtroom, it goes way beyond that. Trump's always painting himself as a winner, claiming he knows how to navigate the system and sway judges to his favor. But these recent defeats shine a light on a different reality. He's looking more like a loser in legal battles, and his arguments are failing left and right. He's not even managing to shield his own people from legal troubles, which really chips away at that tough guy persona he likes to flaunt. For Trump and his supporters, these court outcomes are seriously undercutting the image he's built up, showing that his loud threats don't carry much weight with an independent judiciary. So, when Trump faces defeat in court, it really shakes people's faith in him. If he can't seem to win these legal battles or keep his followers safe from consequences, people start to wonder why they should risk their own necks for him. The recent ruling by the appeals court that didn't block contempt charges sends a pretty scary message. If you follow Trump's illegal orders, you might end up in jail, and he's not going to be able to bail you out. This whole situation makes it tough for Trump to find anyone willing to carry out his shady or illegal commands. It's impossible to overstate just how significant these courtroom losses in D.C. are. They highlight clearly that the judicial branch is putting its foot down against Trump's authoritarian dreams. The courts aren't just nitpicking on technicalities, they're taking a stand against his entire mindset of having unchecked executive power and trying to place himself above the law. It's a solid illustration of the checks and balances our founders envisioned, with the judiciary acting as a stronghold against presidential overreach. The speed and decisiveness of these judgments really send a strong signal to Trump and his crew. The courts are ready to take him on this time around. Unlike during his first term when he caught the judiciary off guard with his unpredictable moves, they now know his tactics and are prepared to fight back immediately. The fact that his legal strategies are getting shot down almost right after they're filed shows that judges have learned from past experiences and won't let Trump use delays or confusion as a way to sidestep justice. For Americans watching this unfold, these court victories spark hope that the rule of law can triumph over authoritarian threats. Each time a court dismisses Trump's appeals, denies his attempts to stretch his authority, or dismisses his lawsuits as having no merit, it reinforces that no one is above the law. Especially in light of Trump's documented illegal actions and his efforts to wield presidential power to dodge responsibility, it's pivotal that the courts make it clear they won't be intimidated, corrupted, or shy away from their constitutional obligation to rein in presidential power. One big point is the court's rejection of Trump trying to fire independent officials. This is essential for keeping the government running smoothly. If Trump could just dismiss anyone who disagreed with him or who enforced laws he didn't like, we'd really be in a tough spot. The recent rulings from the courts are really something to consider. They're doing a great job of keeping the independence of vital government agencies intact, which is essential for making sure no one person can bend the rules to suit their agenda, especially when it comes to someone like Trump. It's almost comical to think about how the landscape is shifting, because right now, officials who might face contempt charges have a solid incentive to follow court orders. This means that rather than sticking with Trump, they might end up cooperating with the courts to avoid getting into even bigger trouble. The fact that the appeals court isn't shielding them from these contempt charges just adds to this interesting situation. And speaking of interesting, let's talk about Trump's lawsuits, which are being labeled as meritless. This isn't just a matter of losing face. There are genuine legal consequences for his lawyers. They could face fines, sanctions, or even disbarment for pushing those frivolous filings. So it's clear that courts are sending a strong message that they won't put up with nonsense in legal proceedings. That could make it tougher for Trump to find decent legal help to support his questionable theories. Not to mention, it's a real blow to his habit of using lawsuits as a weapon against anyone he sees as an enemy. Now, let's not overlook how these court victories are playing out on the world stage. It's significant. The globe is keenly watching whether American institutions can hold their ground against an authoritarian leader. And the courts have shown that they can, which really sends a powerful message. Each time they stand firm against Trump's attempts to push the limits, it reinforces the idea that America isn't just about one person's whims. It's about laws that govern us all and a functioning democratic system. Looking ahead, these judicial defeats have set some important standards that will not only limit Trump, but also shape how future presidents might act. The clear pushback against expansive claims of executive power, the safeguarding of independent agencies, and the enforcement of court directives against members of the administration all create a solid foundation to prevent any future authoritarian behavior. The courts in Washington, D.C. are playing a critical role here, essentially laying down the law and protecting democracy for everyone. So here's the deal. Trump's legal team is really struggling, and it's becoming clear just how out of their depth they are. They keep filing arguments that the courts are shooting down left and right, which makes it look like they either don't grasp basic law or they're being pushed by Trump into defending losing cases. It's a messy situation, painting a picture of an administration that can't even string together coherent defenses or solid legal strategies. This lack of competence just keeps piling on Trump's losses, making future defeats even more likely. And let's be honest, for Trump, these losses must sting even more because they're happening in Washington, D.C., the heart of power where he really wants to show he's in control. Instead, he's facing public ridicule, with judges practically chuckling at the arguments he's putting forth. You have to imagine how damaging it is for someone with his kind of ego to be labeled a loser by the very legal system in the city where he wants to be seen as the biggest shot around. On top of that, these court rulings are pretty tough. The courts are moving fast to reject appeals and uphold orders, which means Trump can't just stall things like he loves to do. He has to either follow through on the court's demands, or he risks facing immediate repercussions for his team and even penalties for his lawyers. What this means for Trump is that he's running out of ways to delay and dodge accountability. As these legal setbacks accumulate, they're setting the stage for even more challenges to his actions. Every court victory against him gives more people the courage to come forward and file their own lawsuits, knowing the courts aren't afraid to rule against him. State attorneys general, civil rights groups, and other plaintiffs are keeping a close eye on these wins in D.C. and gearing up to take action themselves. It's like a snowball effect, and this series of defeats could kick off a wave of legal battles that completely derails Trump's agenda. The message coming from the courts in D.C. is crystal clear. They're not just going to rubber stamp whatever Trump wants. They're ready to act swiftly and firmly against his overreach and demand accountability. The D.C. courts are really stepping up and making it clear that they're not going to let presidential power go unchecked. This is a breath of fresh air for anyone who cares about the health of American democracy. While we watch this legal saga unfold, let's keep in mind that it's not just about legal technicalities. It's about the core of how our government works. The question on the table is whether we'll continue to have courts that can hold a president accountable, ensuring that the rule of law shines bright no matter who's at the helm. So far, the courts are responding with a strong and clear message. Yes, absolutely. Their decisions to overrule Trump's appeals are victories not just for those who oppose him, but for the very foundation of our constitutional system. The legal battles may not be finished, but one thing is becoming evident. Trump's legal maneuvers are floundering spectacularly. The courts are poised to keep knocking down any attempts he makes to stretch his authority beyond acceptable limits. Every legal setback for him chips away at his stance, giving his opponents new strength and affirming that in this country, the law stands above even the president. It's not just Trump's appeals that have been turned away. It's his entire notion of boundless presidential power that's been called into question. This moment will be remembered in American history as a time when the judiciary held firm against the threat of authoritarianism.